against the Disneyfication of Christianity. The discourse or sermon that follows is negatively inspired by a recent sermon given by a seminarist in an Orthodox, Greek Orthodox church. The seminarist says that what he sought for years was a sign from God, a miracle. After all, the Bible is filled with miracles, miraculous happenings, and he was waiting for one before him, before his own eyes. And yet he waited in vain, until one day he had a feeling. Now, this feeling he regarded as coming from God. This feeling for him was a miracle. And so he says, look, in the past they had these grandiose events, physical cataclysms, whatnot. Today we have feelings. They're both miraculous. So now we have feelings. These are the miracles. God speaks to us in our feelings. This is an integral part of the process of Disneyfication of Christianity. And it's part and parcel of the revolution, the modern revolution, which splits the physical and the subjective. Physical as objective, and then the feelings as subjective. And then it tries to reconcile the two. But what is crucial here is to see that the ancient miracle, or the miracle spoken of by the ancient Bible, including the Gospels, is seen literally as almost res extensa, as pertaining to physical objects cut off from, well, the divine. And then the divine modifying these objects against the so-called laws of nature. So the divine enters into nature, breaking its laws, subverting them, and there we have the supernatural. Right? The classics, our classical tradition, Christian tradition, knows nothing about this modern talk. There are no natural laws broken by God in the miracles. There are no natural laws to begin with. For Aquinas, for the medievals, not until the moderns, who invent natural laws for certain strategic reasons. But without getting involved into this for the moment, let us consider again what miracles are for us moderns, and the result of this modernization of the notion of miracles leads us to Disneyfying Christianity, to the Disneyfication of Christianity. The idea is that, look, there are strange physical things that happened. You cannot account for them based on the study of physics, the natural laws that govern the universe, the machine universe, really, they're mechanistic laws. So God comes in and breaks through these mechanistic laws according to which the universe functions normally. So, well, God breaks the norm. He comes in and there's a huge miracle. And it's a sign of God coming into this mechanistic universe. The Gospels warn against a similar type of, conception of the miraculous when it narrates about curious and doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas says, look, I don't believe this body is the resurrected one. And so what does he do? He says, well, Jesus says, stick your finger in my wound. And so he goes there and touches with his hand, with his finger, with flesh. And he says, oh, now I believe. This is extraordinary. This is miraculous. This is a portent that overturns my experience of things. Well, what about a magician? What about one of these tricksters who can perform all kinds of course, eye-fooling tricks? He could do the same, right? He could fool anyone into believing that, hey, this is God's own work. We have technology that does this all the time. But in fact, what is the message of the Gospels? The message of the Gospels there is that the so-called faith of doubting Thomas is not Christian faith. It's based on, physical appearances. It is, in the negative sense, a pagan faith. And so Christianity is to account for, so-called pagans or the pagan attitude, in any case, a non-biblical attitude about the divine. It is to convert the pagans. How does it convert the pagans? In part by using tricks, magic. All right. In other words, ways of speaking, ways of presenting things that lure people to open up to a higher truth, a truth that is unseen. So true Christian faith is faith in seeing things unseen, in the beyond. All right? And it's not based on physical, so-called physical evidence. So the miraculous, the real miracle, is not physical. So what about the sea opening up? What about all these ancient, the Torah's miracles, and in general, the various miracles that happen with Jesus? How are they to be understood? And why don't they happen anymore? This was a question that was raised by Lessing, for example, and in general in the Renaissance they started voicing and articulating this question most openly. And the answer that was given was of two kinds. So on the one hand, you have those who say, look, and this comes about mostly in the 1800s, look, the old miracles were just delusions. And now we understand that the real miracle is the miracle of life as expressed in the mechanical universe. So, what can we say? The real miracle is studied by the sciences, the mechanistic sciences. The real miracle is ordinary life. You wake up in the morning, nature is miraculous, right? The forces of nature, this is all miraculous. Poetic in a, symbolic way. Okay, nothing really extraordinary. Every minute is a miracle. That's comforting, but at the same time, it's whitewashing everything, and ultimately it's turning wine into water, as it were. What about the other reading? The other reading is that, the ancients had a poetic way of speaking. And so when they were speaking of ultimate reality or of an intelligible universe, of things in God, so things absolutely, things seen from within, so things seen spiritually, they had images, right? Images of speech. And so when they said there's rays coming out of somebody's forehead, they don't mean, that a photograph can see those beams of light, right? Which are not necessarily horns, although the word can mean both. They mean that there is an insight, there is a communication, there is an understanding, there is a spiritual activity going on, there is an authority that comes from the mind. The head is not the brain. That's just a matter of speech. The head is the caput to the top, right? the head of the Bible, you could say, is the Bereshit and so forth. So they have a physical, so to speak, way of representing the spiritual. So they use an image that in a vulgar sense refers to physical, tangible objects of experience, and they shift the meaning to refer to what is in God, seen by God. In other words, what is essentially, what is properly spiritual. And so the blind man, who is the blind man? He is the spiritually blind. And we say physically that he is blind because that's how, even doubting Thomas would approach the problem. Right? Once you accept the miracle on a physical level, you can go on, perhaps, to understand that really the miracle pertains to a spiritual agency working in a spiritual realm of things, and that the physical is just a shadow of the spiritual, the full reality, which is seen with the eye of God, and not just as an outside object. Right. So, what about today? We don't have miracles? Well, the problem is that today we live in a modern world, and so we live in an essentially anti-Platonic world, or one that conceives the purely spiritual in terms of feelings. Feelings that are standing side by side with the mechanistic universe. So this is a romantic or post-romantic attitude. What happens here? You fall back on your feelings, you escape into your feelings because, the life that is mechanistic is unbearable, alone is crude, is meaningless, senseless, so we seek meaning in feelings. And this is precisely what the seminarist was calling for. Unfortunately, for him, he is on the wrong track. That is not Christianity, or rather, that is Disney Christianity, which is to say that here we're replacing the reality of the divine, right, cutting through, a physical illusion, with a feeling, right, that begs to be somehow at home in a mechanistic universe. So the mechanistic universe is considered to be real, a world of facts, a world of quantities, and then you have our feelings that somehow try to fit in. What would the classics say about these feelings? Well, they would say that these feelings are all too fleshy, that they're all too physical, that they're all too pagan, that the miraculous is not at work, does not involve feelings. Rather, it involves an understanding. When St. Paul, or rather when Saul, falls from his horse and he sees the light, and he alone sees it, that light is not intended, speaking in classical terms, and it was classical way of speaking, right, is not intended as physical light. It is the light of the understanding. And that's what throws him off the horse. Right? That is the light of someone who says, Eureka, I understand. And that understanding comes from God. For God is the source and the cradle of all understanding. An understanding that embraces and creates the universe. He's not mad. And yet, it's not his feeling. It's not that he has the feeling, the warmth in my heart. No, it's life-shattering. It's not a feeling. So is he nuts? No, well, when you say Eureka and you understand something, you might seem nuts to an idiot. But you are no more nuts than somebody who solves a mathematical problems and says, I figured it out. Now I understand. That's how it is. So, what is the status, the ultimate status of the understanding? Is it something subjective? And for the classics, there's no such thing, because we hadn't invented yet the subject in the modern sense. I am a subject. The subject is a subject matter in classical terms. Hypokemonon, the substratum. If anything, the material. If anything, the subject would be the object. But, and they're not distinguished really at all in the way we do. So, what is it that understands? Well, understanding belongs to God, and God is the mind of the universe. Right? And when we say God of the universe, we mean, well, the creator of all things, the source of life, and that which is alive most fully, right? Because the fullness of life that is thereby transcending a hierarchy of forms of life. It is the fullness that is presupposed by the hierarchy. So, the miracle, what does it belong to? Why is it miraculous? In what way is it miraculous? Well, in a vulgar way, it presents itself. You could take the word to mean something physical, period. And you say, wow. But then there is the real meaning of the message of the story of miracles, which is that God, the mind of the universe, makes itself visible on a low level through these stories, the stories of miracles. And through these stories that bespeak the truth about our ordinary experience, the truth, the hidden truth, and show that there is something hidden, a mysterious intervention, right? A spirit at work in the unfolding of human affairs. In these stories, we are given to understand that we are called to rise to a properly and fully spiritual life. So, miracles are in stories indeed. And these stories help us understand, help us recognize that there is the miraculous at work in everything, really. So they're paradigmatic stories that help us see that the spiritual is the divine is the really real, and that what is physical is really a shadow of what is really real. What does that mean then for us? What does it mean for Christians? Does it mean that there's nothing special about Christianity? No. The Christian stories are of paramount importance. They communicate eternal truths. They show that truth cuts into the physical, and we see this cutting through into the physical in these stories. Should we believe these stories? Yes. But if we just believe in the words and we say we take them literally and we stop there, then we're a little bit like doubting Thomas. And we say, look, I follow Jesus because I stuck my finger in his wound, physical wound, right? Of course, this is in the story. We learn about this in the story. So why are we told this story? So that we can become all like doubting Thomas? And what would happen if we were to become all as doubting Thomas? We wouldn't need to rise to a recognition of the meaning, the true meaning of the miraculous. And so all we would be left with eventually is, well, our feelings. A religion of feelings. And a religion of feelings is, well, a palliative in the face of a mechanistic universe. Religion of feelings is perhaps a pretty thing, but a religion that doesn't hold water in the face of the modern critique of religion. How do you know now that you're not nuts? Oh, because a lot of people say the same thing. Really? Well, if everybody were to begin repeating the same thing over and over again, supported on top of that by the intelligentsia, all the intellectuals and the authorities of the times, would that which is repeated be more true than if it were not repeated? Does the fact that something is said only once mean, by only one person, mean that it's not true? What about lies? Can they become true by and through repetition? Perhaps they're reinforced by repetition. And so at some point you find 10,000 people, 10 million people repeating the same lie, and now they believe it. Now they all swearing by a little red book. And they say, yes, absolutely. That's absolutely true. There is no absolute truth. And that's an absolute truth. Well, so what are we going to do as Christians? Some interlocutor asked me, so what are we going to do? Bottom line, what is it? Well, don't do anything then. The point is not to go out there and do something. The point is to understand. Trust that there is something real to be understood, which is to say that reality is intelligible, that reality is spiritual, and trust that you were born to attain to that reality, to awaken to that reality, to commune with God. Not to wait and pray for God to come one day and give you that sweet feeling while you live your mechanistic life in a mechanistic universe, but to recognize that that mechanistic universe is an illusion. On top of that, today we have a progressive mechanistic universe, which is a modern illusion. The Christian who does not wish to remain Disneyfied is well advised to reflect upon these problems, to recognize that no, God is not in our feelings, but in our blood. He runs through our veins, as it were, and is hidden to our feelings. He is hidden to our senses. To reach out to God is to let go of our feelings. It is to let go also of our so-called scientific certainties, our conceptual blinders. It is to question all of these, to open ourselves up to the unlimited, to expose ourselves to the greatest danger of all.